Okay, let's discontinue milling around and get back to it. Okay. So for the remainder of the afternoon, we have a discussion of plenary-wide work plan and coordination among committees, and then we have the ever-popular governance activities. So I'm going to, well, wait, let's see. Is Brett in the room someplace? Brett, if you're in the room, put your hand up. I don't want to do this before he gets here. Hey, Daza, could you go out in the hall and see whether Brett is around? I need to have him come back in. Yeah, so there's this system which is doing automatic translation or transliteration, transcription of speech into text on the screen. It occasionally misses the odd word. It seems to have a harder time understanding me than understanding many other people. I guess I need to go back and take elocution classes, or like Demosthenes, just practice speaking with marbles in my mouth for a while and see if I can't be clearer. Oh, what's happening now? It's odd. I think of myself as so easily understood. Maybe not by machines. He's gone. Okay, so no, but this isn't actually the part that we're going to do yet. Okay, so for the next couple of minutes, we're going to have a discussion amongst all y'all. See how the transcription gets that, about our work plans going forward and owners of work items. So I think we've gotten quite a bit done here this week. On day one, we discussed consensus priorities for work items, and we have that list from the output of day one materials. And then yesterday, we went into committees, and each of the committees listed a set of work activities that they're involved in. So Brett, you can come up here. So I have an incomplete list. There are a few work groups whose one-page summary reports I haven't received in email, so I will call those out so that we can fill this in. The intention of this of the activity that we're getting ready to have a discussion about is that the work items that are defined by each of the committees are going to be input to the Management Council's process of planning the work of the body, and the Management Council will meet this afternoon and begin that activity. So I'm just going to go down through what I've got, and I'm going to ask a few questions of people, and then we can have any conversation that we need to about this. So for the Security Committee, I have 3 deliverables: a security evaluation methodology, a security model, and a liaison to the work group on use cases. What I don't have, and maybe Colin is still over here, is in the summary that I received, I don't have named owners for each of those activities. So, Colin, can you confirm that there are named owners for those things, or are you still working on getting individual volunteers? Okay. Yeah, so if you could email me the names of who is going to be heading up each of those activities, that'll be helpful to Brett in planning the work. So in the standards group, I have 7 activities. Terminology, led by Steve Shorter. Use cases, also led by Steve Shorter. A functional model, led by Graham Whitehead and Peter Brown. A standards inventory, that is an inventory of existing standards, led by Steve Shorter. Standards adoption policy, led by Jamie Clark. Standards gap analysis, against which I do not currently have an owner. And standards registry, against which I do not currently have an owner. Kathy, are you in the room? I'm staring into the sun here, so it's a little difficult to tell. You're in the room. Yeah, okay, so, well, actually, you're the perfect person to ask my first question to, and that is, it's great to have named owners for things, but there's just one guy by name of Shorter who has a lot of deliverables. Is that going to be a sustainable workload?
Well, that's one of the reasons we're looking forward to a platform for collaboration, and I'll speak for Steve. I'm Scott. It's all right. 5
Scott,
letters,
yeah.
Starts with S. I get that a lot. So once again,
yes.
Name matching. I did have a Scott Shader card at the first plenary,
Well,
which
it's
is
good
what
to know
happens
that,
when you don't submit your registration online.
it's
So.
good to know that the only part of that I screwed up was the identity part.
Anyway, it is a challenge, but I think we have a decent starting set of the terminology and the standards that we've been gathering. It's in the form of a PDF report right now, but the contents could be migrated to the wiki in a moderate amount of time. So,
And then the other,
back yet?
and then the other question, and then I'll have Jeremy make his comment, is the gap analysis and standards registry. Is the committee in the process of identifying owners for those activities?
More hoping that owners will volunteer themselves.
Got it.
So,
Jeremy.
So just to address the question of whether Scott, not Steve, has bandwidth, it's worth noting that Scott, while a consultant, is one of the resources that is being provided, at least part-time, through the National Program Office to different steering group committees to help push things along. We've mentioned several times, though I don't think I mentioned it in this plenary, that one of the roles of the MPO is to try and provide technical champions, expert resources who, given that this is an all-volunteer organization, can actually take ownership of some of these deliverables and help to push them along. Now, that said, I don't think you want any of the work streams in the committees to be overly dominated by just one person, in that they really do need to reflect the consensus of the different committees. But as we're going through this exercise, one thing that would be very helpful for our office to understand is where are there resource gaps, where are there holes where we may be able to, from our office's side, provide some resources that can help to move things along. So we'll be looking forward to seeing what comes out of that.
Thank you. So in the Privacy Committee, I have 2 deliverables. I have a privacy evaluation methodology led by Stuart Shapiro, and I have an alpha evaluation, which is the evaluation of the IDESG website. I don't have a designated lead for that evaluation. Is there one, Stuart?
Yeah, Steve Wilson.
Thank you. Just a minute. Let me see if I can write that down. That's interesting. For the policy committee, I didn't receive an email version of the report last night. I don't know whether it was sent and I didn't get it, or whether it wasn't sent. Is anyone from the policy committee who thinks they sent a report to me here? I'll take that as a no, so we will get in touch directly with the leadership of that committee. From the Finance Committee, I have 2 work items. Dan, this is addressed to you. I have a value proposition document and a set of use cases, which is, among other things, a liaison activity. I don't have designated names as leads for those activities. Has the committee designated leads for the activities, Dan? Okay.
first use case.
Oh, yes. Say that one more time, Dan.
Alex Popovich from Fidelity for the first use case, the single credential commercial.
So you have one lead per use case?
In some cases, I have multiple leads per use case.
Okay, so if you could just email those to me,
I'll
that's
email
fine.
those to you. Okay.
But for the value proposition document, is there a lead?
The value proposition, the first draft is out, so we're just going to be continuing to iterate it, so we don't have a particular individual for that. And we may not iterate it until we start fleshing out the use cases so we can talk about the specific value proposition with respect to that, see what else we might want to draw out in generic.
Okay, so from the Healthcare Committee, I didn't receive an email, a report, or slides. So, Thomas, you're here.
I'm sending it now, but I gave it to them yesterday.
Right, and and that will that have names of leads for activities as well as the enumeration of the activities?
Well, it didn't have names, but you can use my name and David Kibbe and Ryan and Debbie Bucci.
So yeah, if you could, for each of the activities, if you could sort of tell me which person will be the best contact for the activity, just in a separate email, that would be helpful, and I'll give that to Brett.
Thank you.
For the legal committee, I didn't receive an emailed report. Let's see, is Tom in the room? Anyone else from the legal committee in the room? We'll get in touch directly with the chairs of that committee. From the accreditation, etc. committee, I have 3 deliverables: a catalog of existing trust frameworks, a set of accreditation criteria, and a set of prerequisites for administering a trust mark program. That's joint activity with the legal committee. I did not receive names of designated leads for those activities. Is anyone from accreditation here who could? Yeah.
That is correct.
The answer was
more dialogue for the names. The only update is that we're starting by engaging with trust frameworks that are here who have agreed to work with us to start that inventory. And it's been pointed out that we should make sure there's a call for participation, which I'll do right now. Anyone that has a trust framework that you want us to inventory and look at, get in touch, join the committee, email. We want to hear from you.
Wait, microphone.
But it's actually not correct, right? DASA. There is a joint between trust framework and accreditation and testing, not with legal.
Thank you for that. I will make that correction here. Thanks for the correction. The International Coordination Committee, is Jamie in the room at the moment? I didn't receive the email version of the report. I know that they have 3 deliverables, several of which have already been submitted, and we will work with the leads of that committee to get specifics. The Special Committee on Governance, I didn't receive an email version of a report, but we are going to be hearing from the Special Committee on Governance and from Brett jointly here in a minute. So I think it's a good start. We have a lot of activities defined. Some of them, obviously need a little bit of refinement before we go forward in terms of process and content. We had a big discussion about the use cases. But I think the objectives that we had hoped to achieve this week of getting the first draft of the deliverables and of owners against the deliverables so that the Management Council can begin scheduling and coordinating the work of the body, I think you can pat yourselves on the back. I think we have achieved that, not to say that there isn't more work going forward. So for a few minutes here, I'd like to have any questions, comments, concerns about any of the work plans that we've discussed, and then we will move into some procedural matters. So are there any questions or comments on what we just went over? Please stand and let the camera see you and state your name.
Right.
Ian?
Ian Dobson, Jericho Forum. Only a request. How long will it be before we can see the record of what you've just got enumerated here? Because I really do want to get hold of that and be able to use it in my organization.
Properly constituted, this is a question for Brett, since it will be a management council activity to manage these items, so I will refer the microphone to Brett to answer that.
So I took it slightly differently. I think on one hand, you might say, when will the record of this meeting be available? So we are taking minutes for the plenary. Ballpark, Steve? Within the week. So the minutes of this plenary will be available within the week, and I would expect the same for the minutes of the deliberation of the Management Council, which happens later today.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about the work plan? Is there anything that anybody thinks isn't on the work plan that we should be talking about?
Thank you. Yeah, there's something, and it's sort of between the items, and I request that it be surfaced and discussed more directly. And it's what do these individual items relate to, by way of what the IDESG is doing overall, so that we can see how they're relevant, and then begin to imagine, sequencing or how they relate to each other. And what I suggested earlier was we might want to get an articulation of those, have dialogue about it, and then a vote by the plenary, by our next meeting. But if there were other ideas about how to establish that, while we have everyone together in the plenary, I'd like to hear them and see how people would like to manage answering that.
So that sounds very similar to something I wanted to speak to. So let me go where I was going and see if that was far enough to where you were trying to get as well. So Laura, if I could have some of the slides from Tuesday back up there. Thank you. On the first day, you heard me ask for help in setting the organizational goals for IDESG, especially 2013 goals, because that's something the Management Council has to identify, and resource plan, and that also goes to resources that would be applied against the plan, prioritization, et cetera. And we've gotten fairly far. So I think, since there are slides, I should be able to click them. Yes, this is what I wanted to look at. So, well, actually, let me go back there. We did a lot to fill out step number 2. And that's what's being written down, and that's going to be a great contribution for us. And we're going to spend time later today in the Management Council going over that in some detail. So thank you for that effort. And then our work will not be definitive today, but hopefully we'll make a lot of progress in our 3-hour meeting later today. But this is what I wanted to emphasize. I feel like I heard a lot of relevant objectives or relevant activities. These are the things we're going to do. They're very important to NSTIC. Here's why. Here's our approach. We have names associated with most of them. That's great. Some of them even came with timeliness or how they're going to be time-bound, when we're going to do them. That's great. But we have a long way to go before we really have measurable, specific goals with the confidence that they're attainable within that period of time and that we know how we're going to measure them. And that's going to be the task that now is going to fall to the Management Council to work with your input. So with what time Bob still has available in the agenda, to Daz's point, there are a couple things that I would like to see if we can make progress on while we're still all together. One is, would anyone like to volunteer, especially those chairs or committee participants who were not planning to attend the Management Council meeting later today? So especially if you're in that bucket, if there's anything you'd like to refine in terms of your report out of your deliverables to add maybe some more specificity or how you plan to measure your success, this is a great opportunity to do that, because what's going to happen in the absence of input, we are going to come up with our own ideas and give those back to you. Of course, we're not deciding anything today, but we will put forward our own proposals of when some of those deliverables should happen, how to measure whether or not they're going to happen, and whether or not they're attainable with the resources that we can apply. So one is getting SMART goals for all the work items in this organization, meaning all the deliverables in your charters. The other piece, at a more meta level, which is I think where Daza was going, what about the organizational goals? You know, many of us come from large corporations or large institutions, and there are hundreds or thousands of teams, each have their own goals, but there's high level, you know, kind of chief executive, boardroom level goals that sort of filter through the organization. And I would like to see us articulate those as well, and that's going to be an exercise in the Management Council. And I would throw that open because I think it is complementary to, but not exactly the same as, the NSTIC vision. And I think that is, Daz, if I'm correct, something where you were wanting to go. And I would be glad to open the floor and start taking some recommendations of something you'd like to see articulated that we hold ourselves accountable for the amount of time that we have for some brainstorming, so that the Management Council isn't starting that brainstorm in a few hours. It actually starts here now.
So with that in mind, we have 30 minutes remaining in this portion of the agenda. So is there anyone who would like to take up the challenge that Brett has just thrown down? And, you know, maybe give us some color on your view of high-level organizational goals. Don't all speak at once.
Okay, well, I mean, just to stimulate getting started, I would propose that the Management Council, with input over the next half an hour, work with the committees in the plenary to start developing, like what the identity ecosystem framework is, to use the phrase from NSTIC, and specifically the description of what the IDESG is doing and what our outputs are, and how it relates to the identity ecosystem generally. And as a starting point for a suggestion, if I was writing it, I would probably say it should have a table of contents of 3 things. One of those things would be IDESG develops best practices, examples, things that will be useful, what standards to use, examples of trust frameworks, maybe sample legal, everything we can do that would be useful and generally educational and stimulate the identity ecosystem in many ways. I think a second section would be more defined and normative, and it would be the rules and processes for an IDESG accreditation and certification regime for the issuance of a trust mark on identity trust frameworks, and possibly other things, products or services, depending on what the plenary decides. And then the third section, perhaps based on discussion yesterday, might be a general statement of the identity ecosystem, maybe that we do annually, sort of like the Federal Reserve statement of the economy, where we say, this is our assessment of where we're at, here's where we think we need to be headed in a 5-year goal, but basically an overall assessment and statement of the identity ecosystem. So as a conversation starter, I think we should have an identity ecosystem framework. It should organize our work so we can relate use cases and all of our committee work to it, and then have a work plan that effectuates it. It should have a table of contents, and those 3 things are an example of what the high-level table of contents could be.
Thank you, Daza. So let's use what technology we have. Okay, so what 2 things?
So the 2 comments from Amrit.
Oh, okay, yeah. So here are also comments from the online chat room, but I was thinking we have a way of writing something down and actually workshopping it. So I would say this is a high-level goal would be to produce the identity ecosystem framework, right? Some notion of what that is. I know already there's a lot of sensitivity about rebuilding identity frameworks here. So if you take the presumption that you've heard enough about our commitment to not do that, to let us say we will produce the identity ecosystem framework, and it may not be what you've seen before as identity frameworks, right? Because we have this commitment to not be duplicative, then that would be one specific goal. We need to talk about, I like being specific about what it must contain. It will contain at least and maybe listing those 3 categorical areas, we might want to give it a shot of actually writing that into the SOAP Hub, and Daza conveniently has a laptop, and maybe he could do that. And then there were some other comments, but I think they've already gone off screen. But let's give them voice. So, Bob.
Yes, so we had a comment from Ann Rakuya Robbins to the effect that one of our explicit goals should be to be inclusive and creative. And we had a comment from Robin Ore, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, suggesting that we might want to try to define what it would mean for an individual to have rights to an identity in cyberspace.
So those are good examples to, again, exercise our discipline. So I feel like the first example of producing a framework, that can be specific. You can measure whether or not you're done. I believe it falls within the attainable, depending on what kind of timeline we assign to it, and it's certainly relevant because NSTIC says we have to anyway. So now these other 2, being creative and inclusive, so that at first sounds to me like a guiding principle as opposed to a goal that we could measure, attain, hold ourselves accountable to, but let's open that up. Can you turn it into a SMART goal?
I think there was a discussion earlier today during the use case conversation about the need to have specific and measurable goals for outreach and the effectiveness of outreach. And I think that goes, and Kalia and others brought this up, I think that goes some way toward something that might be an idea of a measurable goal for inclusiveness. But the rest of the audience should also comment.
Yeah. Any other comments? I agree with that. We could go somewhere with that. We could put SMART goals around our outreach. We could look at, well, how many people have we included? We could do a count. We could measure that too. Dan?
Yeah, I think the outreach will be very important because there's been a whole history of frameworks that are good, and we're trying to now make this happen. So it would seem to me that the work on the business model and the work on the outreach to really get a checkpoint as to how the rest of the community world is viewing the attractiveness, utility of what we're trying to produce would be invaluable.
So let me play that back, putting it through the SMART filter. So the first thing that strikes me about that suggestion is the relevancy. So that if we could come up with goals that measure our own relevance, we could look at, okay, what's the relevance of the identity ecosystem framework that we decided we're going to build here to a low-hanging fruit community to work with? Are those already doing identity ecosystem work, already deploying identity services, working with Federation? They have processes, procedures, and standards around technical interoperability, privacy, and security. Why don't we work with those communities, again, directed outreach? We could measure how many of them we have reached. We can measure their response to our questions about, well, if we do this, would it help you? So I think that we could build some goals off of Dan's principle. Any other comments or suggestions or challenges? And if there's something on screen that's interesting, someone please make me aware of it because I can't see it.
Hey, Brett. I think the notion of SMART goals is actually very useful. Would suggest that we have to make sure the SMART goals are incorporated into broader strategies. So in the example of outreach, I think we have to be careful that we don't set individual goals for outreach that are abstracted from a strategy, because some of those goals may actually produce work that without the other elements of the strategy or other goals wouldn't necessarily hang together. So it's just a combination of the two.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Jim, and I think that the agreement here is that what you can expect as output are high-level organizational goals or strategy for IDESG. That's not just a regurgitation of NSTIC vision, but something that's actually fits our scope specifically, and then these other measurable goals, and how they tie in not only to those organizational goals, but also the work of the committees. And if we find disconnects, that's going to be really interesting, and we'll have to work our way through it. Go ahead.
Stuart Shapiro. I want to follow up on what Jim said because he kind of touched on something that's been crawling around the back of my mind, and it's a similar but not necessarily identical concern, that we have the potential here to do a bunch of interesting and potentially worthwhile discrete pieces and, you know, pile up a bunch of pieces that don't necessarily form any larger, more coherent whole. Now, maybe some people, you know, and I think I heard some of this on Tuesday, that there may well be some people who think, well, that's just fine as long as we're filling identified gaps out there in the wider world, then that's really all we should concern ourselves with. My impression has always been that the goals for NSTIC were a little loftier than just looking around and trying to fill in various gaps. So while obviously we want to be coming up with specific work items and specific initiatives and specific components, I think at the same time we need to be concerning ourselves with how these all end up fitting together and whether different specific items or different specific work streams end up flowing into one another. You know, you come up with any number of metaphors for this, you know, building a wedding cake, assembling a jigsaw puzzle, what have you. But you know, I think if we don't end up with some larger whole, then NSTIC, while certainly not a failure, probably won't have lived up to its lofty goals.
No, I appreciate that point, and luckily we don't have to do everything from scratch. And this is one of the things that I hope we will leverage heavily. That's the 10-year benchmarks for NSTIC itself. And then we tie back to, okay, so what are those benchmarks for this organization, which is sort of a subset of how NSTIC will come about. So I'm just going to leave that on the slide and hopefully stimulate some other thinking.
So let me make one more comment, Brad. I think an item that definitely has got to be a top-level organizational priority, and actually a relatively near-term one, is to create a specific and implementable sustainability plan before the money runs out.
Indeed. And that one, we don't have to be quite as creative about where the buck stops on that one. I think that's already been assigned to us on the Management Council, and we are going to get into that more deeply than ever before in our meeting today. We actually start looking at some budget realities, even though we're not currently managing the budget yet. Did anything come into the online chat that we should give voice to in the room around organizational strategies or goals?
So, Daza, you can see the online chat better than us. Is there anything that ought to be recited into the room that you've been observing?
I apologize, I just was writing what Brett asked.
Yeah. So Daz's input is there.
Okay.
Okay. If not, then maybe do you want to turn to the next set of topics?
Yes. So the last item for the plenary meeting is our governance topics. You're holding up two fingers. Did that mean something? Oh, peace. Okay. Yeah. Okay. World peace. So I'm going to actually move the order of this discussion a little bit in order to have something that hasn't been mentioned here come first. So we're going to talk about three things here in terms of governance updates. The first is the Ombudsman complaint procedure. The second is the committee charters. And the third, late-breaking news, is some rule of association amendments which have been discussed and agreed by the Management Council and the Special Committee on Governance. And as a way of explaining why the third item is there, I will announce first that we aren't going to be doing a consensus determination on these items today because we do not have quorum in the meeting. So in order for us to conduct business in the IDESG, which is defined in the Rules of Association as either holding a consensus call or having a vote, we need to have a quorum for the meeting, and we have not achieved that here at this meeting. We were worried in advance that this might be the case. Our quorum rules are currently the rules that would be normal in a smaller organization, most of whose members would be assumed to be present at most meetings. So we have an anomaly in the quorum definition. And one of the main items which is going to be placed before you in electronic ballot in terms of governance amendments is an amendment to the quorum definition which strives to balance the need for inclusiveness and the need to make sure that our decisions are representative of the will of the membership, but also allow us to actually have meetings and get business done. So to talk a little bit about that, I'd like Daza and Eric to come up, and I'll have Brett run this part of the discussion, and then we will go to the other two items. The way we're going to do this today is we're going to take you through the substance of the three items that I mentioned, the Ombudsman complaint procedure, the charters, and the Rules of Association amendments. And we will then create a call for we will create a notice of a meeting at which online deliberation will take place, and we will put all of these matters before you for an electronic vote in accordance with the Rules of Association. Brett.
Thanks, Bob. So I was wondering if I was going to get an opportunity to have a Steve Jobs moment at this meeting, and here it is. So as we said before, one of the milestones that we achieved here is that the development of governance and ratifying that by the plenary is done, complete, mission accomplished. Thank you very much. But there is just one more thing, and that is some errata to the governance because of quorum issues. There are also a number of other topics. So we are going to do one last full court press to revise and amend the Rules of Association under which we are all governed, and to speak more about why and how you can participate to make sure that your opinions are included in this last cleanup. I first will start with Eric and then Daza. The three of us are co-chairing this exercise because two committees were created. I chair one, they chair the other, and we're going to do this in a joint committee effort. So over to you, Eric.
Okay, I guess Eric asked me to just start this by reading the resolution for what we're doing, which contains the point. We resolve that our Governance Committee and the Management Council's Subcommittee on Governance will meet jointly weekly to finalize proposed amendments to the Rules of Association for submission back to the plenary by March 1st, including but not necessarily limited to fixing quorum, fixing the issues with notice, and also e-deliberation rules.
So the schedule for this work, the meetings of the joint group are open to everyone. Anyone who has an interest or opinion as to how these issues should be addressed, we encourage to join the electronic meetings. They occur on Monday afternoons starting at 1 o'clock. And the information's on the IDESG website.
1 o'clock, what time zone, Eric?
That would be Eastern time zone, as everyone here at the table has reminded me. And as the resolution identified, the proposal that we would want the plenary to consider is to be available on March 1st. That means that we could have an electronic meeting of the plenary to consider it as early as March 21st. And at that consideration, you'll be able to offer amendments and vote and finally take a decision on their adoption.
Let me make one important caveat to that. You will be able to make comments under any circumstances. You will be able to vote if you have executed the membership agreement by February 14th. So once again, I will urge you to make sure that you can participate in the proceedings going forward by executing the new membership agreement, and I believe we have a comment from Collier. Or do you want to finish something before we do that, Eric?
Well, just two other items. One is the 30-day notice requirement says that you'll see an an email calling the electronic meeting of the plenary sometime around February 19th. And we hope to schedule shortly after the 1st of March, a webinar for questions and answers and discussion about the proposal to get everything clear in people's mind.
Kalia, you wanted to make a comment?
I'm curious if the Secretariat has printed out the new agreement and has them available at the table if we just want to walk by and sign them instead of having to print them out at home and fax them in. I did suggest this over a week ago.
So Kay is walking toward a microphone to, I believe, address that.
Thank you. Absolutely. And actually, for those of you who either were interim or previous members under the old agreements, if you want to go and ask Barthy, she'll print one that's pre-filled out for you with the information you already provided. And if not, she can also give you a clean copy. We've done both for people. That was going to be something I announced at the end for my presentation too, but all of that is available just at the registration desk.
So thank you very much, and don't keep those cards and letters coming. Don't forget to sign the membership agreement. Gentlemen, is there more?
So by way of wrap up, if you care about this, then join the governance committee list. It's GovCom. We're joint now with the Management Council's list. We have the documents that are in draft form on our webpage that you can see. And if you want to discuss them or offer amendments, the best way to do that is come to the meetings, use the listserv, get involved. By the time it gets to an e-ballot before the plenary, it's expected that as much consensus building will have been done as possible. And I'm not sure what the mechanism would be at that point for amendments. So get involved now, and we'd be happy to take your amendments.
Thank you. Yeah, so specifically, right off the homepage, there's a link for, I'm looking over, actually, I don't know, Laura, if you can, oh, there we go. So is that, but that's not the right link, right? That's the link to the committee. If you go for where you'll find the rules of association today, right, which is policy, Laura's about to clear this up for me. Oh, I think you're going to show the page. Right where you'll find the rules of association today, you will now find the draft amendments that are under discussion currently, right? So there's an amended draft that you can look at to see what we're talking about, and you can engage. So this is the call for amendments. This is the call for engagement, because at the end of the month, once we take a consensus call of this joint committee, then we move it to a plenary ballot. There'll be a webinar to explain it to you at that point, but the amendment development process will in fact be done.
And just to be perfectly clear about what Brett is talking about, as soon as the final text is proposed and the ballot scheduled, at that point you will have three options. You will have the option to vote in favor, you will have the option to vote against, and you will have the option to not vote. So Jim.
Thanks, Bob. So I wondered if there was a set scope for the governance exercise. As I recall, we sort of bifurcated some original proposals between adjustments to the rules of association, things like the quorum, et cetera, and the special rule of order number 1, which has some particularly interesting components. And are all of those fair game in this exercise? Are we going to limit the scope? What's the sense of scope for this?
I'm sorry, actually, I just want to clarify something I misspoke about. So this is the best opportunity to engage, this call for engagement now. But one of the things that we're actually going to fix is this understanding of deliberation, and which means that it won't be a blind ballot. You, in fact, will be approving this in a meeting of plenary. And therefore, you could, at that time, at the very last minute, also be providing amendments for consideration, just to be clear. But I think that's going to be tough. So I really encourage you, if you think you care about it, to engage now.
And the meeting, by the way, when Brett says it'll be tough, the meeting will be an online meeting. It will not be an in-person meeting.
So obviously we've got plenty of things to fix. To your question, Jim, the relation here is that the Management Council subcommittee had surfaced some really urgent, high priority things to fix within the rules of association on notice, quorum, and some other things. And then there's other high priority things that have come before the governance committee as well, like the requirement that we do something for e-deliberation that comes from the Rules of Association Proviso 4. So what we realized we needed to do was a quick round to fix some urgent things right now, and that we prioritized these in several meetings. Your committee had liaisons, Management Council, notice meetings of the Governance Committee, and what we're doing simultaneously is going through the over 100 amendments that have been submitted in tranches and are before the Governance Committee, and attempting to stage discussion of them and bring them back before the plenary, those that need to be dealt with now. But mostly our work now is to propose governance in sync with the sustainment and other people that are looking at what's phase 2 for IDESG when the government money runs out and we do maybe a standalone organization or something else. There's some governance for that we're moving toward in the future. So we've got a few stages. This is high priority, and these are now things that have been identified mostly by the Management Council that we're attempting to work with and facilitate for the plenary.
Yeah, and to be clear, the task of the governance, the Special Committee on Governance, as set forth in the previous amendment to the Rules of Association, charges that committee with making this additional set of changes toward the end of the existence of the 2-year period, and that continues to be the plan. This round of changes it has 2 types of changes in it. One type that are mandated by the Rules of Association, the e-deliberations procedures, and the second type, urgent matters that are necessary to ensure that we can continue to conduct the business of the organization in a disciplined fashion. Laura wants to speak.
Yeah, we have Mary Hodder on the line, so here she is.
Go ahead, Mary.
Hi. I have a couple of questions and comments about what you all have just been discussing. First of all, I posted to the forum about a week and a half ago and then emailed out to a couple of the groups that I'm in that I had some concerns about the quorum issue. I get that it's hard or it's unfamiliar maybe for people to be working on the forum, but only one person commented. And I know that a couple of people had read it, but basically what I said was my concern about having a different quorum process for each committee was that we already have a high barrier to entry for new people coming into IDESG or for those who are here because of the amount of time that it takes to understand everything, that by adding the mental overhead, that each committee would have a different concept for quorum, that we actually make it incredibly hard for people to participate across committees. I think that there should be one modality, and we should figure out what the right thing is to do and actually have everybody be consistent. If people disagree, I would love it if they would go to the forum, find my post, and comment. At least we could have a joint discussion. That leads to my second comment, which is about the email silos that we seem to have created between groups. You can only post to a group if you're in the group. And somehow we've mixed up listening in on a group with the concept of quorum. And so my suggestion in that quorum post at the forum was that we actually distinguish between people who want to listen into a group and those who are participating members, that we make some way for people to opt in to be voting members, and that therefore they're counted in the quorum process as groups operate. My issue with the silo thing goes beyond just the issue of quorum. I'm concerned that each group operates in a silo, and that as we ask other groups to participate in one or another action, for example, the Standards Committee wants use cases from lots of different groups. The only way to notify those other groups is for Kathy to send an email to the chairs send an email out, and only people who joined IDESG and then joined a working group get the notification that we would like them to work in, do something in the use case process, submit, comment, whatever. Basically, nobody responded to those requests because I think we operate in this silo fashion, and I think it's actually hurting us across a number of our efforts. And so, I like the idea of using the forum, but we need people to actually go in there and comment because it allows us to discuss across groups. The other issue that I have is that when you want to temporarily work with another group, so for example, if we have a usability issue and a comm issue, which was also discussed this morning, how do we talk to people who are in IDESG about why they're not really coming in and functioning or interacting with people? Maybe they just joined and then didn't function. Or other groups that are outside who aren't here yet. How do we work between two groups to get them in? Well, again, we're stuck with this email silo problem. And so I think, we really need to get a lot of these discussions out of email and into the forum. But I have a real question about forum, and frankly, I don't really want to join another email list. I don't want to be on the government email list. I'd be happy to participate around this one issue, but I think we need to figure out a way for people to temporarily participate around some particular thing and then get back out so that they're I can't spend 24 hours a day on IDESG. I'm already spending 15 to 20 hours a week here. And I'm a volunteer. And I'm not in Phoenix because I can't afford to go there, not just for time, but for money. I don't get paid to do this. So I think we need to think about this more holistically across all these issues so that, we're more effective. But the way that we're doing right now, I see some real failure points. And it's not just with quorum or not just with these specific governance issues. The last thing I'd like to bring up is I'm very concerned that we don't have all the people in the room who will ultimately care about these issues, and that we're building in a lot of governance and rules and processes. We don't know the effect of what they're going to do because we actually haven't really developed that much work product yet. We don't know what effect it's going to have on work product or on specific communities or issues. But we also don't have all the relevant folks here to actually be making that governance. I feel like we're really unnecessarily complicating what we do before we get everybody here. And I get we don't want to wait forever, but anyway, those are my concerns. I'm worried.
Thank you, Mary. So I'm going to observe that you've raised a number of issues. One of them has to do with tool support and interaction design, and I'm going to ask the Secretariat and the subcommittee on our tools and technologies to make sure that they consider that, but I'm going to ask Daza and Eric to, for the time being, confine their answer to your concerns about quorum.
Well, thank you for your input, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that we like to hear from people as we deal with these issues. On this particular topic of quorum and the issue that you raised, I'm happy to report that the present working proposal is one that would establish a unified quorum calculating mechanism that would apply to all of the groups. And we have recognized that governance is hard to do, and it's not realistic really to expect every group to define their own rules and procedures differently from every other group, and it does make it very confusing for people if that were to occur. So we are trying to work in that direction. So thank you for giving us further encouragement to continue that way. And then secondly, in the discussion here during your comments, we will stand up a form on the website for other input so that we can receive input without people having to join the mail list in particular. And lastly, as a personal observation, I'm certainly happy to discuss with anyone on the phone issues that are coming up, and I'm sure Daza is the same, and so feel free to give us a call.
And I would echo a call that Mary made on the phone. I think we need, for purposes of effectiveness of communication and also for purposes of having a universally accessible record of our deliberations outside of the room here, to try to have some of these conversations in the forums rather than email. So if we could, for the purpose of this discussion of these amendments, try to have that conversation on the forum. If it doesn't work, we will fix forum interaction in some way, but I would like to encourage the membership to discuss these issues and any amendments they might want to offer to the greatest extent possible on the forums rather than in email.
Right. So just to be clear, the Drupal website, idecosystem.org, has a forum, and that's where I've taken an action item to set up a thread to have links and engage in dialogue on this thread on amendments.
Thank you, Deza. Laura, you're looking as if someone else wants to talk. No? Okay. Okay, so that is the conclusion of the ROA amendment discussion. So we have two discussions remaining. We have discussion of the Ombudsman complaint procedure, and Steve Medic will come up now to lead us in that discussion. And then we will have committee chairs discussing the charters which are currently in draft form before you and which will also be considered as part of the online deliberation. So, Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to be here. I want to point out that I do have a discussion forum for this, and want to point out that we are encouraging people to participate. The complaint procedure, which was mandated during the acceptance of the Rules of Association, can be found in the discussion forum, and it's defined as complaint procedure. And you will find at this point that the only two participants are yours truly and the gentleman to my right, and who came up with some terrific ideas about the original draft complaint procedure, and many of them have been adopted and modified and then are on the website under policies, where you'll find the IDESG complaint procedure and the so far modifications of that procedure. What I want to talk about very briefly, and I will keep this very, very brief because I know everybody is sitting on the edge of their seat to discuss more governance, is that I attempted to draft a procedure that really works to the objectives of the organization. Procedures that are written in a vacuum, procedures that are written for the sake of procedure, never work. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to recognize that there are certain principles that we need to uphold. And so one of the things you'll see on the first page, and I will give credit to the chair of the plenary for this recommendation, is while I included reference to the NSTIC guiding principles, I reiterate the NSTIC guiding principles in the procedure because the complaints have to deal with the operation of the IDESG, the application of the Rules of Association, the policies, and really to the issue of upholding the NSTIC guiding principles. So when you are filing a complaint, when you have a concern, that needs to be the major objective. Do we have a culture? You try to develop rules to a culture. That's been one of the difficult elements of the whole discussion on the Rules of Association. And while I've tried to draft the complaint procedure to a culture, to this organization, we're still a work in progress, and we're not quite sure what that culture is. So there's some very simple principles. I won't go through the whole process right now, but I've tried to establish a linear architecture for complaints. The first step is to really try to work it out amongst yourselves. I can be an informal assistant to people to try to help work out these matters, but go to the committees where you may have an issue. Raise it in the committee. Take it as far as you can in the committee. Raise it with the chair. If it doesn't work out in that context, then you begin to enter a problem resolution process where you lodge a formal complaint or writing with the chair of an entity that you may be involved in, that you may have a question about. There are two different types of complaints. There's a complaint that you can lodge against the entity. You don't like the process that was utilized by a committee. You don't like the outcome that came out of a committee. And again, be very specific in terms of that outcome, how it violates NSTIC principles or the principles of the Rules of Association. But you can also file complaints against individuals, against other members. You can file complaints against the chairs of committees. And so there's two different types of processes. And the first objective is to try to work it out face-to-face, both on a committee level and on an individual level. If that doesn't work out, within a certain prescribed time frame that's in the document. The complaint then moves over to kind of a formal complaint with a formal response in writing by the person that you're complaining against. If it can't be resolved there, it then comes over to the Ombudsman, where I do everything I can to bring the parties together, to try to mediate and give people a foundation for resolving the complaints that may arise. There are elements, as in all complaint procedures, there could be elements of confidentiality. I think that would be of limited application, because one of the principles that we have here is to do everything in a open way, in an open fashion, but where complaints can be sensitive, involving individuals, there will be decisions made regarding the confidentiality of those complaints. Again, I will not get into all the procedures. I also will have the basis under this complaint procedure to determine that a complaint is meritless, and there's standards for what constitutes a frivolous or meritless complaint. I would have the ability to meet with various parties to try to bring evidence together to bear to try to resolve this in the manner that most mediators use in trying to resolve conflicts. The time frame, again, is about a 90-day time frame on a max level from the beginning of a process to an end. Frankly, if it's something that requires some expedition, there are procedures in here whereby the Ombudsman could really move this process along much quicker, particularly if we're in the middle of a decision-making process. If the matter is not resolved, there is a final action that would be taken on any complaint. If there is a complaint against the plenary, and this is hard in a political body, in a body where you're going to be having consensus and votes, ultimately a majority vote of the Management Council would resolve the complaint. If the complaint is against the Management Council or another entity, right now, and I know the Chair has raised a question about this, the current draft language gives the Chair of the plenary or the Vice Chair of the plenary, which will be a new position, if he has a conflict on the matter, an ability to make a decision, a final decision and conclusive decision about the outcome of a complaint. So that is the procedure. My hope is, and the Chair, I think Bob mentioned this earlier, is to have this as part of the plebiscite or the electronic deliberation that we'll have sometime in March. I encourage everybody to go on the discussion forum, take a look at the draft, the current draft of the document, some modifications that Bob has raised and that I have made as well. And anyone, feel free to call me or send notes, but I think I would encourage discussion on the discussion forum, and we will try to modify the document and get a final document ready in advance for in accordance with whatever notice we come up with and whatever date we come up with. Thank you.
So thank you, Stephen. To be clear on that last point, the intention is to use the same schedule as Brett and Daza and Eric noted for the amendments, and so the intention is that this is your call to participate in the online discussion forums, suggest any modifications that may be appropriate to the text, and that will then be finalized and placed in a notice of electronic deliberation on the same schedule as the previous item noted. So please do start participating now. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment or ask Steve a question about the proposed ombudsman complaint procedure? And by the way, Laura, could we have the chat room back up? I see no comments or questions in the room.
Of course, Daza has a question.
Forgive me, but I had one question.
I couldn't resist.
Maybe I didn't read it right, but it seems like if there's an issue with Management Council, ultimately it goes to the chair of the plenary or perhaps the vice chair. If there's an issue with within the plenary or related to the leadership, then it goes to the Management Council. So I could envision issues where it sort of relates to some combination of both. And what happens then?
We have another land in that case. We have to, and you raised that issue the other day, Daz. It's something we need to think about. I would ask people, I would encourage thought. I don't want to overcomplicate things either, but there is a possibility that you would have a joint complaint, I imagine, so we might have, I just don't know where you go for an entity, whether we bring in an outside arbitrator, because there's really no simple answer to the question. But I will give that a lot of thought. That is a question you raised, and it's one I'm thinking about.
And if there is a suggestion from anyone in the audience as to a proposed resolution for how to reconcile and resolve a complaint against the body as a whole, and what the decision-making process for that should be, please keep those cards and letters coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Now, what I would like to do is we'll move on to the last item. And again, this is the charters for the committees. I want to have the committee chairs give just a brief presentation of their charter. And generally speaking, what I'd ask is that you focus on whether the work items enumerated in the charter are in line with what was discussed earlier today, whether there are any intellectual property provisions associated with your charter, and whether the Management Council's guidance, if any, has been incorporated into the current text that is before us. So I have no particular order to go through things in. Let's see. If you are a committee chair, could you please come up and sit at the table to my right so that I can just pick you off one by one and bring you up to talk. So I see Colin making his way over. I see Kathy. Let's see. Do I have others? We may have lost a few. I see Jim. Let's see. And I guess Jim Williams, are you going to? Yes. Okay. Let's start then with Colin, since he is closest to me.
So I should set precedents and go quickly then, I think, given that we're almost at lunch. So there were some slides, but I don't know if they've made it through. So I'm just going to talk to a few points anyway, I think. So the objectives, as we talked about in terms of the Security Committee Charter, we talked about the security evaluation methodology being the primary deliverable, use cases taxonomy and functional model, working with the other committees to work through that. The security model, so there was a slight nuance, I guess, in terms of the wording, but I've sent an email to follow up with both yourself and Brett in terms of the discussion this afternoon. So there's 2 points, I guess, of interest. One is that in terms of the quorum perspective, we took a slightly different view on that. We obfuscated that, I guess. What we decided to do was, in the event of anything on which we couldn't reach consensus within a call or a meeting, we decided that there would be an electronic ballot. And the basis for that ballot would be that to participate in it, a member had to have attended 2 out of the last 4 meetings of the committee. And to pass the ballot, we would require 50% of those eligible voters to assent to that particular item. So we we felt that avoided a lot of the quorum type discussions for those issues on which we couldn't gain consensus. And we were anticipating that would be 2 or 3 items, not a lot of items that we would reach that on.
So I guess I'll ask you to consider Mary's comment that homogeneity of quorum requirements is a desirable thing, and discuss that with the Special Committee on Governance.
Yeah, and that's partly why I wanted to highlight it today, and certainly happy to do that. I'll forward the actual wording, because we did we went over the wording quite a bit to try and get it right in terms of eligibility, timing of the ballot, and so on, to make sure that was precise. The other issue is, so we went through and we did incorporate all the comments from Management Council. There was a bit of a deviation in time in terms of the version that they reviewed versus the one that is finalized now and approved by the committee. So we've pointed all that out in a comment disposition document that can be posted, I think is posted. It certainly is posted on the Security Committee website. We can make sure that that's available. In fact, there was actually no change to the 3 comments because they had already been incorporated at that time, but that's clearly recited here in the comment disposition. The one comment that came up on our call last Thursday, as the membership agreements start to percolate up through the respective members' council, the issue around patent policy was highlighted on Thursday. I deferred that discussion till yesterday. We had about 30, at least 30 participants, so there was a fairly broad representation. We currently have about 100 people signed up to the listserv, but there was over 30 either present or on the phone. The unanimous position was to incorporate the patent policy Exhibit 1 of the IPR for the Security Committee. There was no objection to that. However, because it came up sort of last minute, and we felt that there perhaps wasn't adequate coverage of everyone on the committee to properly review it and just make sure it was okay. So we decided that we would issue an e-ballot to that, which I intend to do on Friday this week, the 8th. That would close on the 22nd. So assuming that that passes, as seemed to be indicated by the group, and that would be our viewpoint, then that would be available for the electronic proceedings, as you talked about in March.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments to call on? Seeing none, let's see. I'll ask Jim Elstey to come up next and talk about the Privacy Committee. I note, by the way, that Anne Rakuya-Robbins asks what feedback the Management Council gave to the Financial Working Group, and that she notes that she's on the group but hasn't heard from the Management Council. Brett, can you identify in an email to the Financial Working Group the Management Council representative who was given the assignment of commenting, and then determine whether or not any comments were felt necessary? No, it's because I presume you're a member of the Management Council, and you're... Yeah, so can you get that information to her and let her know whether there are, in fact, any comments, or... so that'll be done, Anne. Okay, Jim.
Thank you. So the Privacy Committee had a bit of a head start on the charter exercise. The NPO had produced a white paper with a draft charter, but we formed a subcommittee that essentially went through that top to bottom. We went through every section, embellished, refined, and created a draft charter that was approved by the Privacy Committee on or about the middle of October, and that October 19th ballot version is what's been posted on the IDESG website. We think the major difference between our charter and all the others is an explicit section on the evaluation methodology and our responsibilities vis-a-vis that methodology and the rules of association. We haven't addressed the patent policy question, which I just learned about here this week, and my sense is that what we would do is, rather than I think one of the committees is suggesting withdrawing their charter and putting in some language to address that question. I would rather see us as a committee address the issue and then amend our charter and leave the balloted charter out and available for approval. I think getting charters approved would be a nice milestone for the IDESG. The only other thing I would add is, I mean, we got Management Council feedback that, I would love to sit here and crow about the charter we have, but Kim Little sent us some really good language that I'm going to use. It said, very thorough with strong scope, consistent evaluation methods, and a very collaborative objectives. All sections seem solid, no recommended changes or concerns about overlapping responsibilities with other committees. So thank you, Kim. We're good with our charter, and we're, ready to see it. I would, if we had a quorum, make a motion for adopting our charter, but...
and you will do so anyway, just via electronic deliberation.
I'm all good.
So I'll ask you a question that I should have asked Colin also, and that I will in a moment. Have you opened a discussion forum thread for anyone who wishes to post a comment before we go to the electronic deliberation?
For the charter specifically, no,
yes.
But we will do that.
And Colin, will you also open a discussion forum thread for the security charter? Thank you.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you, Jim. I believe Brett has a comment. Could we get a microphone down to Brett in the front? I'm going to stick with the Jim theme and ask Jim Williams to come up next.
So just on a little subtle thing that Jim just mentioned very, very quickly in passing, which was some members suggested perhaps revising the charter in light of the IPR policy. So the patent policy. Right, specifically the patent policy. So that is a kind of existential issue for each of you. It really does cut your work into one of two worlds. Either your output is expected to theoretically read on any patented intellectual property, or it's not. And so I think that's the big question you ask yourself. I was expecting very few committees to feel they were in that category, perhaps zero. So I just think you have to have a very deliberate discussion about that, because if you have members who feel like, I think I know what we're going to do here and I think I've got patents, then you definitely want to cover it because the rest of us are exposed if not.
Yeah, and if you don't think that you have such members, you probably would lean in the direction of not incorporating the terms, because it is possible that that might diminish participation by members who might have concerns. Jim Williams, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Not much has changed since I talked about the Policy Coordinating Committee's charter last night or yesterday. Again, our goal is to facilitate the end goal of a harmonized set of consistent and high-quality IDESG policies that meet the INSTIC guiding principles. And again, our charter, which you can view online, we unanimously approved as a committee yesterday, and Dan Chenok is a committee chair. He's doing a great job but couldn't be here today. But again, we look at ourselves as others as a service committee, working through our liaisons with the other committees to make sure that we can look for consistency, appropriate socialization, reuse, and just being able to harmonize all the policies coming together. And as I talked about yesterday, one of our near-term products is to get a better definition of what a policy is and what it is not, what putting out a template for what would be the contents and the format of a IDESG policy. So that's pretty much where we are. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jim, could I ask you to relay to Dan a request to open a discussion forum thread for anyone who wants to submit comments in the short time remaining before we open this for electronic ballot?
I would be happy to do that. Is that something that Laura does?
So if you have...
I believe Dan's on a train at the moment.
Oh, it doesn't have to be this afternoon. Okay. So let's see, there are a couple of other chairs in the room now. So Tom Smedinghoff, do you have a charter that has been filed and that you would like to discuss with the group?
Well, we do have a charter that's been filed. I'm happy to discuss it if you'd like.
Yeah, so what I had asked in terms of discussion was just a really brief rundown of the status of the charter, whether the Management Council concerns, if any, have been responded to in the existing text of the draft, and the status with respect to inclusion or not of the patent policy.
Okay, starting with the last one, I can't imagine that the patent policy would be of concern to the legal group in terms of incorporating that or addressing that in the charter. As I mentioned yesterday, our focus and what we tried to say in the charter is that we're more of I suppose, a service committee responding to issues that come up in the IDESG and trying to provide education, understanding, analysis, input on the legal side of the questions that come up in the IDESG, basically. We approved our charter a while ago. I think in all fairness, given the way things are developing, we may ultimately want to make some changes going forward. But like I said, it was approved probably late last fall.
So if I could ask you, as I've asked others, to open a discussion forum thread on for anyone who wishes to make changes, and also to discuss any amendments that you may want to make to it before we move to an electronic ballot relatively soon to approve it, that would be helpful.
Okay, certainly happy to do that.
Thank you. Kathy Tilton, would you like to discuss your charter? And by the way, Peter Brown, do you have a charter to discuss?
Hi, Bob. I think we're in a similar position as Tom's. Our draft charter was approved by the committee late last fall. We submitted it in I think the first batch. We haven't had formal feedback from the Management Council. Even though I'm on the Management Council, we obviously refer it to somebody else to take a fresh look at it. I don't think my gut feeling is there's no implications on the IPR or patent policy, which would affect us in exactly the same reasons that Tom's raised. But I don't see any. There might be a couple of small rocks on the road ahead, but there's no big boulders, so I don't foresee any major issues.
Thank you. So yours will also be ready for the electronic ballot when
I
it
think
occurs.
so, yeah.
Thank you. Kathy.
Okay, thanks. Our base charter, we briefed at the last plenary, so I'm not going to go back through that, and our work plan was discussed yesterday, so I'm not going to go into the details of that. I'd like to just concentrate on the amendments that we've made. We had no specific Management Council review comments to incorporate. However, we did feel we needed to go back, since ours predated the rules of association, to align with them. So we added text regarding consensus, quorum, and voting rules. The only place thing I really want to mention about that is that we did identify different voting rules for two specific things, and one was for deliverables. We were requiring a 66% vote as opposed to a majority vote, and as well for charter amendments. So what this means is any deliverable that we feel is ready to be sent to the IDESG or for approval to get out of our committee, we have to have a higher percentage than for most other type of votes that we take. We also we were asked to explicitly address collaboration, given that many of our work items affect the larger group, and so we did add a paragraph, a clause on that. We did a little bit of general cleanup. A couple notes. We did choose to retain the embedded roles and responsibilities from the Management Council note, because the status of that note remains unclear, and we thought it was least ambiguous to do that. Also, I wanted to mention, as Colin did, about the patent policy, that we are withdrawing our charter for a vote at this time as a result of that. Most standards organizations, even though we don't consider ourselves an SDO, do operate under some type of patent policy. And so we are going back and reviewing that, and our one concern we have with that has to do with how that might inhibit our ability to work with other committees that are not operating under the patent policy. And so Colin and I had talked to Steve about getting together after this to discuss that further. The other issue I wanted to raise has to do with membership. And Laura, I don't know if you're able to bring up the slide we had talked about. But I'll go ahead and start talking about it. One issue that came up in our deliberations was that currently, here's what our charter says, that membership is open to all IDESG members, that SEC membership is by self-declaration, and you become a member by joining the SEC mail list. So the issue has to do with voting versus non-voting membership. And so at present, the only means to join a committee is to join the email list. And so what this results in is a list of people, including those who merely wish to be kept informed about what's going on, as well as those who are interested in actively participating in the committee. So you can see where this would affect things like quorum and voting. If you have a much larger population that are actively participating, you may have trouble making quorum or passing any ballots. So one idea that we had, this is just one idea, I'd love to hear other ideas, and I will open a thread on this. And actually, this is related to what the discussion thread that Mary Hodder was referring to earlier, and it was this discussion that generated the thread that she has already posted. But one idea is to just add a join button to each committee website. And then a logged-in IDESG member has the option of joining as a voting or a non-voting member. It would be the last slide in that deck. So if you could advance to the very last slide. I do?
Well, actually, we've hidden it from her. Last time she was up here, it was on the floor. We're playing hide the clicker.
Yeah. Very funny, guys. Oops. Crap.
So, by the way, I'll note while you're being silent here for a moment, Kathy, that Colin Wallace posts in the online forum that he has the same concern with committee voting rules that Mary Hodder earlier stated with committee quorum rules. So I would ask you to maybe try and draw out those two discussions in the forum discussion that you have going forward. And also, before you get to the matter on this slide, I thought I heard you say that you're withdrawing the current text of the charter. Should I take that to mean that you think that your charter may not be one of the ones that's included in the immediately upcoming electronic deliberation?
Correct, depending on the timing of that. So we had the baseline charter, and then we submitted red line amendments to that charter. This issue came up just yesterday, so we opted to wait until we had more clarity around the patent issue. And if that gets cleared up before the vote happens, then we'll resubmit that. But if it happens afterwards, then we'll have to wait for next cycle. But we think it's important enough that that's the decision that we made yesterday. We did consider the amendment process, but decided that, you know, that still, we just decided on the withdrawal aspect of it.
Okay, so I'll have you finish what you're going to say on this slide, and then I believe Peter Brown has something that he'd like to say.
Okay. So anyway, this idea about declaring yourself as a voting or a non-voting member, if you were to choose to be a voting member, then we'd want to make it clear what that meant and what the expectations were in terms of participation in meetings and ballots. And so I would say we're interested in discussion of this issue, and is it something that other committees are worried about? One thing, if we do go with the patent thing, right now, if we were to put in there that we are operating under the patent policy, that requires each individual member of the committee to sign the patent policy. So that may clear up the problem, because if you're willing to sign the patent policy, then that makes the membership issue a little more clear. We may still have some issues around that, but.
Yeah, and by the way, we should commend that statement to Colin Suter's attention too. If you operate under the patent policy, it is necessary for each member to affirmatively accept the patent policy as a condition of membership in the committee, and there need to be processes for administering that. And if you need to have a meeting at which people who aren't covered by the policy participate, you probably need to have procedures for declaring, some sort of safety zone at a meeting. So that needs to be thought through.
Did Peter have a question?
Peter.
I actually will formulate a question for the plenary, but it's addressing the point that Kathy, I think, rightly raises, that there are a number of issues around the sort of rules, internal rules and procedures and responsibilities of committees, which don't just impact her committee, and I think it is something which impacts us all. Now, we did, as you rightly said, draft a sort of note from the Management Council suggesting a common baseline set of rules and responsibilities that could be included by reference rather than inclusion in the various charters. But I absolutely get the point that that is a Management Council rule. It's not something that's been submitted to plenary. Now, the question I make, and it's just to get a sense of the room, is would it be useful for the Management Council to take back that note, to draft it in a way that could be submitted as a common base rule set for all committees, alongside the votes that we're having on the charters, and if necessary, do the necessary housekeeping in looking at the rules? Because I think there are two principles in doing that thing which I think were important. One was transparency and simplicity of having a common rule set across all groups, so that we have a sort of level playing field in terms of how people are behaving and what procedures are expected to be followed. And secondly, transparency in the sense of each committee being entirely free to say, we actually want to waive provision X, Y, and Z, and we want to include provisions A, B, and C because they're important to us. So that actually makes the whole process a lot easier when reading through, rather than having to pass a set of procedures embedded in one committee charter and comparing it with others and seeing what's different. So we're trying to simplify it in that process. So the question is simply, what's the feeling of the plenary? Would that be a useful exercise to take that back and make that as a proposal, and then have the committees just do a bit of tweaking on where they have included it, just to say, okay, we'll only include the exceptions or differences, or is it, is that a step too far and too complicated, and we just move with what we've got? I just want to get a sense of that.
Yeah, so I think we can spend a moment discussing that. I fear that it may be too complicated a discussion to conclude here in the room, and that it might be best to post that question on the discussion forum and get a sense of people's opinions that way. But if anyone would like to comment a bit on what Peter has just said, please do.
Peter, I have one thing request is when we went back and looked at that MC note against the Rules of Association, there were just a couple areas that overlapped. I assume the Rules of Association would take precedence. So when you, and I also heard that there's some looking at how we might try to align some of these quorum and consensus and voting rules across the organizations. And so I think the really valuable part of that note is the roles and responsibilities part. And so I'd suggest that that other areas that are being either covered in the ROA or in this ongoing work to normalize that it not be included in that.
Right, I forgot to mention one small but important element, which is that I've actually had conversations with Steve Mednick about ensuring that the note does align with the ROA and that there's no conflict and that those sort of issues just disappear and it's clear that the ROA takes precedence.
Okay.
So Jim Elsie has a note. I do want to note that there is one more item of business that we're going to do after this last charter presentation, and that is that there is another vote that we're having in addition to the procedural votes that we're describing here today, and that is the election of our permanent or at least non-interim officers. That vote will be taking place conveniently on April 15th, I believe, and we're going to have Kay Shepard come up in a moment and describe the procedures and schedules for that. I will also note once again that if you want to vote in that election, it would be a good idea to sign the membership agreement before Valentine's Day. And also, of course, the quorum procedures will be a lot simpler if there are no members. So again, in order to keep the quorum discussion complicated, please do sign the membership agreement. So Jim Elsie, and then we'll try and wrap up this phase of the discussion and go to Kay.
Thanks, Bob. Just a quick administrative request. Since several of the charters haven't set up threads on the forum and have been asked to do so, I was wondering if we could request that the Secretariat set up a folder for the charter discussion, place a link to all the ballot charters that are posted on the website, and kick that off for us so that we have a sort of central location to go and look for these discussions as opposed to everybody running off and doing their own.
So Laura or Sudi, do you have an opinion about that?
We have a folder now for charters.
Well, there's a folder for charters, but there isn't a folder in the discussion forum to contain all of these threads.
Right.
Oh?
Yes.
Yeah, our question was for you, Bob. Do you want the discussion forum to have one topic for all the charters, or would you rather have a separate topic for each charter?
I would like to have, I would like to have each of the discussions be a separate thread so that if we're talking about what's great and horrible about the privacy charter, we don't have cross-chatter with what's great and horrible about the security charter.
Then yes, we'll set up one topic per charter.
And is there a way to organize those into a single tab so that those topics appear under a single tab on the page?
Yes.
Thank you.
I stayed up here because I had a question about what you said about elections.
Yes.
You were talking about, were you talking about the general election, or were you talking about the committee elections?
I, in this case, am talking about the elections of stakeholder category delegates and officers of the organization.
So I have a question about the election for the committees, and my question is, do we have to wait until the charters are ratified in order to hold those elections?
So my sense of that is that the answer is yes, but I will ask Steve whether he agrees with my interpretation. So the question, Steve, is whether it is necessary for committees to wait until their charters are approved in order to hold elections for their own officers.
1, 2. Yes, here we are. I think the answer is yes. I think until you have a governance structure in place, you probably should refrain from elections. You could probably have informal transitional officers, but I would wait until your charters are approved.
Yeah, that was also my sense of the order of our rules. Thank you, Kathy. Now, just let me make sure that there isn't a committee that I have left out. Is there anyone in the room who has a report out on a committee charter that I have not already called upon? Doesn't look like it. Okay, Kay, come on up, and then I'll have a few final words before we adjourn. Brett has something to say while Kay is walking up to the podium. You can come on up, Kay.
So I'm not sure I heard that invitation quite right, but I think you're saying, are there any other comments about the charter process? So one of the things about being elected in one of the at-large positions is that you're not really supposed to represent the interests of your company. So take this for what it's worth. I happen to know something about the position of PayPal and eBay on this question, and so I'm happy to share it. In the entire history of the creation of this organization, going back to all those other goals and all the public comment, we never envisioned this organization would set itself up as an SDO. And so the patent policy that we agreed to have as an option in the last round of governance structure was something we really only saw being invoked by a group that has already done massive gap analysis and found that there's just no standards body that's going to solve this gap, so we have to do it. In other words, I never imagined to see that come into play this early in the organization. And it would be a huge barrier of participation and of grave concern to companies with large patent portfolios. So just a point of consideration, because I don't think that point of view has been shared yet.
Thank you. I'll add a little bit of color to that also. In order to engage in work that might bring the patent policy into play, it would be difficult for this organization to handle the administrative requirements of doing that, given that we do not have legal counsel assigned to the organization to work through the issues. So I would commend to your attention the question of, if we choose to invoke the patent policy, whether we are actually able to administer it.
Ready? I just wanted to briefly go over the election schedule. We've had a lot of questions, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on board and knew what to expect as things come at you in the next couple of weeks. You've heard Bob say over and over that the deadline for signing those membership agreements is February 14th. I might add that it's 11:59 Pacific time, so to try to give you as much time as possible to get those in. I also wanted to mention something that Kalia had raised about the accessibility to those right here at the site if you want to. And I know many people have been doing this throughout the course of this week, but for those of you who may have signed a membership agreement in the past, you are welcome to go out to the desk. We can call that up. You can sign it here. You can print a copy and take it with you. You can check the status. I know we also had several new people here, some where their company has been involved, but they're a new person assigned to it. So if you don't know the status of your company, again, go out and talk to Barthy. She can look that up and tell you where it stands. Some people don't even know who the member representative was that we were given. So you can get all that information so you can follow up and get those agreements in. And then there's a few folks who are here for the very first time, have never been to an IDESG meeting. So you're just sort of getting your feet wet. Again, you can go to Barthy. She can show you how to sign a membership agreement online or to get you a hard copy if that's what you need. So all those options are there. I just want to make sure everybody knows that we can do that right here, and we can continue to work with you by email and by phone after we leave this week. So keep doing that. We know that this is crunch time, and so we want to try to work with you as best we can. The other thing that you need to keep in mind, and part of the reason for this hard deadline, is that on February 15th, we will be doing a call for candidates. The call for candidates is a bright line, and in the rules it says that you must have signed a membership agreement and be a member by the call of candidates in order to vote. So that's why these deadlines go together, and it's really important that you try to meet that if you can. The call for candidates will be issued on the 15th, and it will be for all of the positions. And I'm going to go through what those are. And last, just to be sure everybody knows, the current officers were elected for interim terms, which end on April 15th. So this is our first sort of official election. Some things will seem a bit compressed, and it's our effort to make sure that we meet those time frames given some things in the rules that we really have to follow. So, okay, so let me just give you a little more detail. February 15th, the call will go out. You will be given information on how to email or go to a link, so you can submit candidate recommendations. You can recommend yourself. You can recommend others. You can recommend somebody for 2 different offices. You could recommend them for plenary chair and a stakeholder category delegate, so there's more than one. Ultimately, you can only serve in one position, so we'd have to make some decisions there. But that call for candidates will close on February 25th. So you have to have those recommendations to us by then, and you will be getting mass information out to everybody plenary-wide on the mechanism for doing that. But we're not issuing it until the 15th because, remember, that's a bright line. So as soon as we issue it, then all bets are off, and if you haven't signed an agreement, you're not voting. Okay, at-large officer elections. The rules has it set up so that we have sequential elections. So you may feel like you're getting notice of elections a lot. The first election is for the at-large position. So that's plenary chair, and there will be a vice chair for the plenary in this go-round, the management council chair, and on the management council are 2 at-large delegate positions. So all of those are in that very first election. It opens on March 14th, and it closes on March 18th. And you'll be getting a notice of the ballot and who the names are and all of those things. Again, those are governed by the rules. They have very specific timelines, so I didn't want to bore you with all those details. If we need to, we will establish runoff elections after the 18th if there are any ties. Okay, so then the second set of elections will be for the stakeholder category delegates. That election will open on April 10th. If you put your name in for both an at-large position and a stakeholder category delegate, and you get elected to an at-large position, you cannot serve in 2 positions. So unless you tell us otherwise, we'll take your name off the ballot. On the other hand, if you tried to run for both and you didn't win an at-large position, now you can have your name for a stakeholder category delegate. I hope that's not terribly confusing. But a couple things, though, to keep in mind. In order to run for a stakeholder category delegate, you must have chosen that as your stakeholder category, right? And you also can only recommend
Let me interrupt
candidates.
for one moment. And the way that you select a stakeholder category is on the membership agreement, which we are continuing to urge you to sign.
Yes, thank you, Bob. Good point. And you also, to recommend a candidate for stakeholder category, you have to be a member of that stakeholder category to make a recommendation. So in other words, I can't be, a relying party and making recommendations for candidates in the consumer advocates group, right? So I have to be a part of that group to make that recommendation. That election will open on the 10th and close on the 12th. And you'll see that the hope is that, we meet that April 15th deadline. If not, if we have any ties, then we'll have to schedule the runoffs after that. I want to just give you a slide or two here on the next plenary, but are there any questions before I move off the elections? I'm hoping that means it was really clear.
There are no questions.
Okay, so then the last thing I just wanted to leave you with is the next plenary, our 4th plenary. The dates for that are May 9th and 10th. We will be meeting at the Network Meeting Center in Santa Clara, California. I'll also tell you that that same week, May 7th to 9th, is the IIW conference in Mountain View, California. And for those of you like me who are not California natives, just so you know, my understanding from the folks who live in that area that it's very close together, probably a 15, 20-minute drive, unless you're in rush hour. But so they're not very far apart. And at this point, we haven't blocked hotels, but next week, now that this meeting is over, we'll be taking down and making links to what happened at this meeting and putting up everything for the next plenary on the website so you can begin to register and all. This is the actual address of the Network Meeting Center. And Bob, did you want to make any comments?
I'm just looking at the
Okay,
slide.
so I think one of the, you can see this was something that the Management Council encouraged us to do, and I would certainly encourage you to consider coming at the beginning of the week for the IIW conference. I know I've already seen and heard about a lot of discussions that are very much related to IDESG that occur there. And then we'll flow into our meeting after that. So any questions about there's a question over here.
Russ would like a microphone over here. Wait, that's not Russ.
No, that's Kenny.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm staring into the lights.
Okay.
It's Kenny.
Can you explain why the overlap date?
Well, actually, I worked with Kalia Hamlin and Phil Winley, if I got Phil's name right, to talk about that. We really tried to stay away from the days that were the real meat, as I understand, of IIW, and I recognize I've never been there. But Kalia had suggested that if we were going to have an overlap, and in order to avoid having a Friday-only meeting, that maybe we could do it then. What we haven't done is sat down and figure out when will we start and when will we end. I understand that that's a lighter day for IIW anyway, so we still have to work out those details. We want to try to minimize the overlap as much as we can.
So the way it stands, I mean, you have two different meeting venues also, so people have to make a choice.
Yeah,
On that
so
Thursday.
on the Thursday, that's the case. I mean, the simple answer to your question is that the constraint is that there are only 5 days in a work week, and both of the meetings are sufficiently big that they require a slightly more than 2 days.
I would really urge you to clarify the intent of how that, I mean, why is that? And because this is confusing. I mean, one would have thought that you want to create synergy, and yet they're meeting in different locations, overlapping one day. How does that work?
Yeah, so as I understand it, the logistics of trying to have a meeting of this organization at the Computer History Museum weren't feasible.
Right. Yes.
Since I pushed for this arrangement, I'll speak to that. A lot of us will engage in IIW, and what we wanted to do is come up with something where we were strategically encouraging engagement at IIW, because we get to expand to more participants in the identity ecosystem that way. People that aren't showing up here show up there. People are actually building systems. So we cannot mandate it. We can't actually have formal sessions there because there is a barrier to participate. I mean, it's a conference, so you pay a fee and stuff like that, and you don't pay a fee here is one of our principles. So how do we do that and then still make use of that time and get some decisions out of it? Because if you presume that people will do both, then perhaps they've done enough informal work on some topics that then they can come in together in a formal day and a half and actually make some decisions. So that was the idea. The reason there's overlap is because it's a very packed week. And, under advisement from the organizers, that last day is kind of light. So that's the rationale going into it. And I just invoke the fail fast and iterate principle, and we'll see how it goes. Let's try it and see how it goes.
So, and I have Judith and Kathy in the landing queue here.
I just wanted to say that I understand why you've made the decisions you have, and I think, it's a step in the right direction. But the assumption that IDESG meetings are always going to be on business days may actually be prohibiting some of those other communities that we're talking about being involved in some of the proceedings, because they have day jobs that are not in tech, where they either have to take a day off to participate in IDESG or not participate at all. So I'm just putting it out there that perhaps this might have been an opportunity where we could have done a Friday, Saturday with some agenda setting, where the Saturday stuff was to involve people who need to be able to be involved in a Saturday and not during their 5-day work week. Just an idea.
I think that's a really good point, and we will take that into the planning for future events. It's an instance of the frame problem, right? We live within our conceptual frames, and sometimes obvious things don't strike us. Kathy?
Two things. Just as you saw, we're proposing to some use case workshop in May as well, and I just mentioning that so that I could work with the IDESG leadership and perhaps Kalia to see how we might work that in. And second, and I have to give credit to Colin for bringing this up, and this is for a future workshop, not for this one necessarily, but in some of the standards organizations, the way they organize is they have their working group meetings first, and then they have the plenary afterwards, so they can do report outs and basically do the roll up your sleeve stuff and then do the plenary, especially if you need to ratify anything that was done during those sessions. And so right now the way we've been doing it is kind of interspersed. And we'll have a breakout, and then we'll have a little report out, and then, it's back and forth. And so I just wanted to bring that up as a possible organizational suggestion for future.
So Tom is going to want to say something in a minute. This is another good topic for conversation. It may not be obvious, but the structure of these meetings has been modified each time based on the feedback of the membership. And we are not under the illusion that we have achieved a perfect form, so suggestions like this are very welcome. Tom?
Yeah, Brett just reminded me, within the American Bar Association, we've actually done something like this in the past. The legal committee dealing with identity has actually met during the week. Some of the committees that I've been involved in dealing with cybersecurity and some of the other issues have actually met on the weekend. In fact, right before the RSA conference, the Information Security Committee will be meeting on the Saturday and Sunday. And there's another cyberspace committee that meets on a Friday and a Saturday, kind of straddling both. So it might be worth considering some of those alternative options as a way to get better attendance.
So I think maybe, Kay, for a future management council agenda item, we should put a more detailed discussion of the structure and scheduling of future plenaries. Yes, Judith.
It occurs to me that perhaps something that might help the management council, because you have so many things on your plate that, and you as a chair, is maybe some sort of subcommittee that is a plenary planning committee that can, help with some of this type of stuff and maybe social activities, et cetera, and help the secretariat looking forward into the next year and gathering information from chairs about what they want to have and coordinating.
I'll defer to Brett for any comment that might be appropriate, or you can just say, yeah, we'll think about it. Okay, so Brett accepts your suggestion as one that he will pursue. Other comments or questions? Oh, I was afraid Tony was raising his hand, but his hands are just tired from banging on that Surface tablet. Okay, well, so we are now at the end of our agenda. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank you for signing the membership agreement, which you'll, of course, all do immediately. And I think we've achieved the large majority of the objectives of this meeting. I hope that you found it productive and that we're moving in the direction of having the discussions that you came here to have. We have a few organizational issues which we will be voting on. I want to thank you very much for all the hard work you've put in. I think the discussions they have been a great combination of civility and bluntness. I think Brett's injunction, to be a little bit selfish in these discussions stands and is good advice going forward. So in the last couple of minutes, I'll open it up to the floor for anybody who has any general comments, questions, suggestions, criticisms, etc. So I think we have one from Jeremy and one from Peter.
Thanks, Bob. I just wanted to briefly say, in addition to thanking TFS, the Secretariat, for putting this on, and the efforts of Brett and Bob and all of you for participating these last few days, this is clearly hard stuff. If it was easy, somebody else would have done this by now, but it's not, so we're all here to tackle the hard issues. What's been very encouraging to me the last few days, both watching everything and more importantly talking to you, has been the general air in the room and online that we're making forward progress. And forward progress against hard challenges is a good thing, and let's keep doing it. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. It's a question and a suggestion. The question is any form foreseen for a report out of the plenary to the general membership in terms of something that is communicated to those people who have not been able to follow the whole plenary? And the suggestion is that we actually, Communications Committee together with the Secretariat, we're looking at the issue about the newsletter and so on, that we actually have a dedicated newsletter to going through and trying to summarize the work that's been done this week and giving embedded in that pointers to the various discussion lists that have been kicked off, whether it's on the committee charters or other issues, so that people have some sort of sense of overview of the work of the week. I just wondered if you'd have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so you read my mind. So the meeting is, as Brett already noted, being minuted, and Steve will be providing us with the minutes. But in addition to that, I intend to work with Kay and the Secretariat to put together an issue of the newsletter which covers the activities that we undertook this week and the accomplishments that we have got out of them. So both those things will be done. And I think Jim Elstey had something to say. Other questions or comments? So I'll ask again the question that I asked at the end of yesterday. So how many people feel that that this week was a productive use of time and achieved a successful outcome? Raise your hands. How many people are disappointed that we didn't achieve what they would have expected or hoped for? I see 2 hands in the disappointed category. We had probably, again, 3/4 of the audience in the good outcome category for people who are online, and I will note that 1 person voted in both categories. Brett, you wanted to say something?
Just as something to maybe frame your thoughts as you go back into your own discussions and committee work between plenaries. I haven't talked with Bob about this or the soon-to-be formed plenary program committee, but one idea that I'll push for, and maybe something like it will ultimately be what we do, is to have very early in the meeting a presentation in the simplest form, 2 slides, from every committee. The first slide is, what did we accomplish since the last plenary? So please focus on what do you want to be reporting on as your accomplishment when we gather in May that you achieved between today and May. And the second might be what we're here to accomplish at that May meeting. And then at the end of that plenary, a 3rd slide gets added, which is what we actually accomplished while we were here. So just something like that. Again, we're looking at mechanisms of transparency, measurement, accountability, and clarity of what we're working on. So please think about what you want to accomplish between now and the May plenary.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much to Sudi and the Secretariat, to Jeremy and the NPO and the NPO staff here who have been supporting us, to Brett and the Management Council and the chairs, and to all of you for coming here and doing the work. I think it was a good week. I hope you do too. We are now adjourned. See you in May.